Podcasts are everywhere, but what even are they? Are they interview shows, talk radio, true crime, news, audio, video? Stick around and I'll break down today's podcasting world and maybe give you the confidence to start a podcast of your own. I'm Dan Smith, podcast editor and producer, and I help people create better shows with confidence. Podcasting was invented as a way to download radio broadcast onto an iPod. The word podcasting comes from iPod and broadcast. To get a broadcast onto the iPad, inventors David Winner and Adam Curry invented the RSS feed, which stands for Really Simple Syndication. And they did this using some software they called iPodder. Podcasts have always been synonymous with RSS feeds, but the technology is constantly developing and changing. The advent of video podcasts on platforms such as YouTube has seen a huge shift in what podcasts actually are, with many people dismissing video podcasts of whether they're actually podcasts at all. The most common type of podcasting is probably an interview show, with channels such as The Joe Rogan Show and Diary of a CEO taking video to the forefront. But one of the most popular ever podcasts was Serial. This was a true crime podcast where a journalist investigates a historical murder case, essentially opening up the case with new evidence coming to light as the podcast develops. If this had been a video podcast, would it have even been a podcast at all? Because essentially you're then making a documentary, and it would have been more like Netflix making a murderer. But then many TV shows have an accompanying podcast which runs in line with the show, giving something additional and more conversational. Podcasts which have the highest listener figures are generally daily news shows such as The Daily, which is essentially an audio newspaper. And a video version of this would be perhaps replacing the news. Is a video podcast even a podcast? Well, if podcasting was invented to download a broadcast, then does that mean you have to download a video for it to become a podcast? Essentially, a podcast can be whatever you want it to be. There really is something for everyone. Whether you want audio or video, whether you want the news or a story or an interview, it's up to you. The future may see us change what we call video and audio podcasts, but there's a lot out there for us to enjoy consuming and enjoy making. So to start your own podcast, what do you need to make it a podcast? Do you need a microphone? Essentially, no. You can just record into your phone or into your computer, but it's not going to sound very good. So firstly, I would recommend getting a microphone. Do you need a guest? Like I said, podcasts can be anything. If you want a guest, great, get a guest or do a solo podcast. Do you need a studio? A studio really helps with the sound quality, but a podcast can be anywhere. I've recorded a podcast on a golf course. You may need some different equipment to do field recording, but really make your podcast wherever you want to make it. Do you need an editor? You can edit your podcast yourself, but if you're new to it, it'll probably take you a lot of time and your results might not be too good. So I would recommend getting an editor if you can, like me. Once you've made your podcast, how do you get it out there? Now, how is a podcast delivered? Like I talked about, RSS feeds are the classic way to get out an audio podcast. And if you do this through a platform such as Spotify for Creators, Buzzsprout, Captivate, they pretty much do the work for you. Or if you're producing a video podcast, you can upload it directly to YouTube. Now, if you've got something to say, a podcast is one of the best ways to say it. It's affordable, accessible, and lets you reach a global audience. Now, if you love podcasting like me, subscribe to the channel and I'll be giving tips on everything from recording to editing. If there's any videos you'd like me to make, let me know in the comments.